Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him and now had elevated him above all the other nobles and officials. And that's not all, Haman added. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting in the king's gate. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, have a pole set up, reaching to the height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself. The suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. I was talking with Kevin last week, and he had a similar challenge that I had this week in figuring out what God wanted us to say based on the scripture that we were studying. And I actually, my weeks change every week, and I got to Friday and there was still nothing there. And I worked through it Friday and there was still nothing there. And I prayed, and yesterday, this is what God gave me. So we're not going to cover every little nook and cranny of this passage, but I'm hoping that what I preach is what the Lord is giving for us today. I would also say, as a reminder, preaching is not a one-way activity. This isn't something I do to you. This is something we do together, ideally. And so as we read the word and as we preach the word, whether it be me or another here at Living Legacy Preaching, our hope and prayer is that you invest yourself in that event, that you are not just sitting there like a bump on a log, but that you are allowing the Holy Spirit to move in you and change you and teach you and convict you and push you more into God's presence and in such a way that you are changed to more faithfully serve Him and live for Him in your own personal life. So to that end this morning, I want to challenge us, I guess, to keep in mind the reality of the situation at hand in our text today. Last week we talked about how Esther was she had accepted Mordecai's kind of like challenge to go to the king and ask him for mercy for her people, the Jews. And she made known to us through the text that her going into the king unannounced could quite possibly mean the end of her life. Anyone going into the king without him inviting them could be rightfully killed for that offense. And so when Esther is, if you weren't with us, you might not know that, but when Esther is showing up here in the king's presence today, she is quite possibly going to give her life. She's risking her very life to take a stand for her people. This wasn't something she did flippantly. This wasn't something that she did like unknowingly. This was a calculated decision that she made, that she was willing, if necessary, to give her life for the well-being of her people. And from a human perspective, Esther was embarking upon kind of two impossible tasks. The first was that she was about to do what we just described. She was about to break the law, go into the king unannounced, and ask for a favor. And Kevin kind of made that clear last week. For some time, Esther had not been called into the king's presence, which kind of may lead us to believe that she could possibly have been kind of on the outs with him. She hadn't heard from him. She didn't know what was going on. She hadn't been invited. So for all she knew, he didn't want her there. It was very, very possible that he didn't want her there. And so this was a serious task that she was embarking on. She knew that there was a good chance that the king wouldn't extend the scepter to her. And if he didn't extend the scepter, the consequence was death. And that, I think, to us might seem kind of out of the realm of possibility. If Dr. Biden or Melania Trump went into their husbands when President Trump was president, or currently President Biden is president, and they asked for a favor, there is no chance they are risking their life to do that. I mean, there's no chance that's going to happen. And so for us, I think that this is kind of like the stuff of fantasy and legend. Like it didn't. This was not actually probably the context. It's a story that's heightened, perhaps, to give kind of some meaning or something. But this was the reality. This is not fairy tale. She very well could have lost her life for this offense. So, as Esther prepared for approaching the king, she realized what she was doing. She realized what could have happened, that breaking the law could have led to her death. It was a weighty decision. So that's the first impossible task she's embarking upon. The second impossible task she was about to take on, if the king did in fact extend the royal scepter and she survived that first impossible task, stemmed from the request that she was about to make. It was established law that any edict made and sealed by the king could not be revoked. There was no changing it. And we know this to be true just from our text, from two places, one that we're going to get to in a week or two, but one that we've already come across in chapter 1. In chapter 1, verse 19, when the king made his decree that Vashti, his former queen, who he deposed, he made this decree that she was never again to enter the presence of the king, and establish this decree. And there it was written in verse 19 that this should be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be revoked. In other words, she was embarking upon a second impossible task. Not only was she risking her life, coming in unannounced, which could lead to her death, but if she survived, she was going to ask the king to change a law that couldn't be changed. Have you ever felt obligated or even called to a task that appeared impossible at the time? Have you ever felt like God was telling you to do something and you're like, and you just at least think to yourself, there's no way that could ever happen? Or maybe it isn't, maybe you're even a little kind of fuzzy on whether or not it's him, but you have this sense or this urging that you're supposed to do something. But immediately your thoughts run into that place where this could never possibly work out. It's happened to my family a couple of times. I hope that it's happened to you. If it hasn't happened to you and you are walking with Jesus, it is going to happen to you, I'm pretty sure, at some point in your life. But it's happened to us a few times. One of those times was about 8.5 years ago. And at that time, we were living in South Carolina. Our kids were 7 years old. They were so happy at their school. I was pastoring our church. And at the time, so don't hear what I'm not saying. At the time, it was my dream, church, right? I didn't know about you at the time. So now, obviously, things have changed. But at the time, it was like my dream church. I couldn't have been happier. Dottie was working for a great boss and loved her job. And I think it was safe to say we'd never been happier. I mean, felt more kind of like in God's will, and just everything was just so perfect. And then all of a sudden, life was flipped on its head. Dottie comes to me one day, kind of just, I don't know, bashfully, and says, John, my dream job at my dream university has come open. And I'm pretty sure she was afraid to tell me, because she's shaking her head, because she knew how happy I was and we were, and this was going to potentially throw everything on its head. But she entered the proverbial throne room, right? And was hoping that I would extend the royal scepter. That, by the way, never happens, right? She is the president of our country, and I often salute her because I know who's in charge. So anyway, just getting that out of the way, she entered and presented this request, and didn't know how it was going to go. And fortunately, the Lord was all over that situation and gave me the presence of mind and grace to support her. And we decided she should apply. We prayed, decided she should apply. So, but she said, "But John, don't even worry about it, because the chances of me getting this job are like slim to none." And so she got an interview, which was like, okay, well, you said slim to none. We're getting the slim. And then she got another interview, and then she got another interview, and then another interview, and then finally she was offered the job. And then she comes to me, and it's looking obviously more like we're possibly going to Pennsylvania, until she comes to me and she says, they're going to make an offer. They made an offer, but they're going to bring me the package. And we need to figure out, you need to tell me like how much I need to make in order for this to actually work out. Because if we were leaving South Carolina, I wasn't going to be working at least for a couple of months to get our family settled. And then I had to find a job, and we didn't know how long that would take. So we just decided we were going to have to figure out how to live on her salary. So I ran the numbers independently of her. I put a number on a piece of paper. I slid it across the table. This didn't all happen in one sitting. This is like, a couple of days. I eventually slid it across the table to her. And she turned the paper over. She just laughed. She's like, you don't understand. This is like Christian education, and they're not going to pay me this much money. And I said, well, I understand that. I totally appreciate that. But this is what we need in order for this to happen. Like it doesn't work if we don't get this. And she said, okay, whatever. And I think she kind of at that point she just kind of resigned herself to, this is not actually going to work out. And she was good about it. And so a few days later, the package came, and she came to me with smiles, and I was like, oh man, okay. And they offered the exact amount I wrote on that piece of paper, exact amount. And then again, I was like, man. Most of you have had similar situations, not so much an exact kind, but in that you were presented with something that seemed impossible, but or maybe you're currently being presented with a calling, like an urging to do something that appears to be impossible, but you still feel like it's the Lord's will, like it's supposed to be done. And you should run from it for that reason, but you still kind of feel like you have to pursue it. You have to go towards it. You have to do it. And maybe in the midst of the pursuit, you were encouraged towards disbelief as you looked and saw someone else getting what you wanted, but they weren't doing it the right way. They were doing it through evil or illicit means. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. You felt like there's something you're supposed to do, something you're supposed to maybe have, or what, I don't know what it is, but you see somebody else getting to go towards that, but they're going about it in all the wrong ways that you can't possibly pursue. Or maybe they were living your dream because their priority was not God's, which means they can do all those things like work on Sundays, or they choose to keep all of their money when you are called to give a large percentage of your money to God. Or they don't have to give up a night of their week to go to community group. So they have all sorts of extra time to do all these other things and make it happen. Or they don't have to be honest, and they can cut corners that you can't. They can play by a different set of rules that allow them to achieve things your faith appears to limit you from doing. Or they can cut your legs out from under you, because they aren't hampered with the ethical norms you are, and can actively seek your destruction by doing things you can't. And so maybe along the way of this calling that God has put on you that seems impossible, you're tempted to take a different path or to chart a different course, which isn't according to God's will. But, but there's a danger in trusting the world's ways to find God's way. Things in this world aren't always what they seem. There is, in fact, a reality that exists apart from this world and its principles, activities, and powers that supersede anything of this world, no matter how powerful those in this world may appear to be at any given moment. It looked like Esther and her people were about to be exterminated, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. And then on top of all that, you got this guy Haman who continually does these things that they can't do to get his will done. But looks can be deceiving. And the one thing that Haman and his wife and friends didn't take into account is the reality that they couldn't see. The reality that Esther and Mordecai's God is real and most powerful, and as a result, always gets his way. This week, Israel was attacked by Iran, and it appears that that conflict could potentially grow into an even larger one. Time will tell. Last week, as Dottie mentioned earlier, a good swath of our southern states experienced some devastation as a result of that hurricane. And Russia and Ukraine have been at war for years, and it looks like it's just going to continue on with no end in sight. And Dottie and I were talking about all these things this past week. And at one point, I think she or maybe one of us made the comment that it just seems like our world is falling apart. If it feels like that to us, I can only imagine how it must feel for the children, mothers, the elderly in Israel and Iran and Lebanon and Ukraine. How scary it must be to know every time you go out for milk or bread, every time you head to work, every time you leave to go to worship, it could be your last. So how do we deal with this sense of powerlessness and helplessness when confronted with an impossible task? I mean, isn't that what the people of those countries oftentimes are facing? Many of them don't carry guns, and they're not part of the military, and they aren't able to feel like they could substantially change the situation. And it probably looks to them like things are impossible, like it's not going to change, like there's no way out. How do we, in our own situations where we face what appear to be equally impossible tasks, kind of deal with that? How do we continue to press forward and hold on to hope that things are going to be okay when everything around us tells us a completely different narrative? Last week, Kevin covered chapter 4, verse 16, which says, for in speaking about Esther here, it says, "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Inherent to the truth of this statement is the reality that someone beyond Mordecai, Esther, Haman, or the king himself brought Esther to her royal position. And given the inclusion of this text in the biblical narrative, we can safely surmise that this other person can only be God himself. The way we persevere and hope in the face of such powerful and apparently unbeatable opposition is to remember that there is a reality beyond this one. And that reality, while largely unseen by us, is ultimately powerful and absolutely in control. And that reality's ruler, God himself, brings us to situations that are, here's the thing, he brings us to situations, as Doug mentioned earlier, all of this is part of his plan. Everything is part of his plan. And he brings us to those situations which are beyond our control and beyond our ability to change, so that when he uses us to change them, there is no other explanation for how it worked out than for us to give God the credit. So that in overcoming what appeared to be the impossible, God gets the glory. So that all around can see that our God is sovereign. I don't know for sure, but I believe that some of you are likely facing a situation right now that is beyond your ability to control or even accomplish. A task that appears to be impossible. Maybe it's some responsibility that seems too big for you to finish, an obstacle that lies ahead which you fear may fail, may fail to overcome. Maybe it's a responsibility at work or school that you didn't ask for and you didn't even want, but somebody thrust it upon you, and you can't shirk it or otherwise get out of it. You must face it. Or perhaps you took on a project at home or in your community that you thought was going to be easy, but in the end it turned out to be quite substantial. And you're just regretting taking it on because you don't have any idea how you're going to finish it or how it's going to come together. Or maybe it's a health concern that there just doesn't seem to be any medical answer to, and it feels hopeless. Or maybe you've fallen spiritually and you feel trapped and hedged into a no way out situation created by your sin. And it's scary and it's isolating and it's painful. And there seems to be no way out. I don't know the ins and outs of your particular situation, but as we mentioned a few weeks ago, if we really believe God is providential and sovereign, then we must believe that He has planned every single situation and planned every single one of them for the good, the bad ones, the ugly ones, and that they're all part of His plan. You are not where you are by accident. And maybe if you find yourself in such a situation, kind of like Esther's, where there seems to be no easy or good options, God has you there so that you trust Him and move in faith. So that you kind of come to the end of your own rope, so that you can't, there's nothing you can do. And so that through Him moving in this situation, where you're proverbially kind of risking your own life, when as Esther did when she came into the king and house, he's brought you to that moment, that scary moment where it seems impossible, so that He can show up. And when He does, when He makes the impossible possible, no one other than Him can get the credit. But we must keep in mind that in the midst of God working out His plan, it's going to look to many like you're losing and God is not the victor. Some, if not many, will be like Haman, who pridefully struts around as if he's the victor in the situation. They will puff their chests and loudly proclaim their victory, but don't believe it. Don't believe it for a moment. Don't believe that lie. Hold fast in faith and let God continue to work out His plan. Don't give up, but rest in His providence, knowing that He is quietly but sovereignly working in ways that can't be seen or understood, but are absolutely real and will one day be realized, not just by you, but by everyone who has the privilege of seeing the story unfold. There's no more beautiful picture of this. And I mentioned a few moments ago, but of our sin. Our sin has created, our sin nature, like we talked about this morning with the youth, but has created a situation where you're not like dying, you're dead. You're dead. You're dead. And there's no way out. No way out. There's no amount of good things you can do, no amount of nice things you can say, no amount of money you can give, no amount of times you can go to a worship service, no matter how many prayers you offer. There is no way out but God. But God. Jesus created a way where there seemed to be no way. And because of that, he gets the glory. This is the promise of Esther, but it's also the promise of our life in Jesus. When it looks like there's an impossible task that can't be overcome, it can be, but not by us. God is providential and he's sovereign. He is able to do immeasurably more, the scripture says, than all we can ever ask or imagine. And if we will rest in him and not try to figure it out on our own or make all the pieces come together on our own,